doors are open for you, walk through them. They've been open for you because someone recognises something in you that they want other people to see.
Hello, and welcome to the latest episode in Leadership Blueprint. As you know, we've spoke to some fantastic leaders across the region, and today's no exception. We're joined by Claire Maslen, a really fantastic individual who has worked across Europe, North America, the Middle East, and also Australasia. She's done this from C-level and board positions within telecoms, fintech, digital payments. And so I think this ever-evolving industry that she is a part of is a really great one to explore from a leadership standpoint. Of course, Claire is also a female, so I think it's going to be really interesting to see some of the lessons that she's learnt, both in other mature markets and in the Middle East. What are some of the differences with that? So I think today is going to be a really interesting one. As always, please do like and subscribe to the channel. It keeps us keeps the lights rolling and keeps more of these great interviews happening. So again, thank you everyone for joining us today. And absolutely, Claire, thanks so much for being on today's show. It'd be great just to have a quick little detailed overview for the listeners to share a little bit more insight, and then we can jump into some of the questions as normal. So again, thanks for your time, and over to you.
Oh, thanks, Oliver. And yeah, I'm really happy to be here. So as you said in your opening, I do have quite a varied background, and one that extends 30 plus years. I fell into technology, and when I say that to people, they're kind of, it gives them puzzled looks, but basically I left school at 16, didn't have a clue, as you know, many young people don't understand where they want to head. And I think I was just very lucky, coming into technology in the late 80s and working for some incredible leaders over the time. So hopefully through this conversation we can explore, you know, some of those lessons that I've brought from those great people that I've worked with.
No, fantastic. And that's absolutely what this whole series is about, taking, you know, sharing your lessons with others, looking back on your own career. What are some of the things that you would have done differently? What are some of the things you can impart onto others? So yeah, looking forward to this. So one of the big brands you were with at the start or earlier in the career was Cisco. And then obviously over time, that's then sort of grown into the fintech ecosystem. What were some of the biggest changes you've seen from a leadership style from a Cisco landscape into more fintech? Because obviously there's been a big time shift in that, and technology shift and approach from the general industry. I just wondered, you know, starting very broad, what's been some of the key shifts in sort of leadership styles over the career to date so far?
Yeah, so well, Cisco, I was there in the mid-90s. I joined the UK business when they'd actually just acquired another business in the UK. So they doubled their size pretty much overnight in the UK. They'd gone from 150 employees to 300. And it was at the time when Cisco was on a buying spree. And they believed, you know, and it is a proven method, they would grow by acquisition. So if they saw a key piece of tech, they would go out and buy the company. And one of the things that was so evident there is they were absolute pros at onboarding. So when you joined Cisco as a new employee, you arrived, you were all inducted at the same time. You were all given the tools. We were all given the script, you know, the branding. We knew what it was all about. We were talked through the journey of the brand and how, you know, you look at the old Cisco logo and it looked like bits and bytes, but actually it was the, you know, the Golden Gate Bridge and all of that. So we were given the tools to all be on board and have that storybook very quickly. So that was number one of my sort of experience there. And then in terms of how things have changed, yeah, I mean, I've worked, obviously I had the great fortune of working for O2 Telefonica for a number of years. O2 were another really strong brand, a business that leads by its brand and its vision and its mission. And then more recently, you know, I've worked in or adjacent to some of the fintech and the mobile payment stuff from a consulting perspective. And, you know, things have changed. Obviously, technology's changed. You touched on it at the beginning, you know, the number of women has changed. We're still not there, by the way, but I'm sure we can come back to that. But diversity in general has changed, and I think
Yes.
it has been, for me to observe, it's been cyclical. So, you know, I said when I started out, I left school at 16, fell into tech. There were a lot of people going to uni. Then, of course, you know, you join company like Cisco, which actually they're from the Valley. They didn't worry too much about people's education. It was about people's aptitude and their skills and their development
Mm.
opportunities. Then you come through early 2000s, I think, especially in the UK, everyone was really pushing the university and the degree agenda. So, you know, it's gone, I think you see these sort of patterns forming of where diversity can come from. And it's not a gender thing, it's also a social background and educational background. You know, do we push the degree debate, or actually can we just look at individuals and see what skills they can bring? So there's been some interesting ups and downs with that, as well as I sort of sit back and observe.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think that's something as JOH partners that we're always trying to impart onto our clients as well, is very much diversity of thought, not just diversity of gender or nationality. You know, it is the backgrounds, it is the ideas, it is that healthy debate that helps a business grow and transform. Talking of transformations, obviously with O2, with Vodafone, you were there during those transformative years for those organizations. You spoke very highly so far of the vision and the mission of these organizations. How did you see your style and your leaders at the time, their style, having to adapt to the transformation? Because I think it's all good and well you join a business for the vision and the vision and the mission, but as that transforms and changes, being able to navigate and continue that and still believe in what the new looks like is a real skill. Is there any sort of key takeaways, or is there any key memories you can sort of pull on to say, you know, there's a great story, Oliver, where XYZ happened, and you know, it's a really telling thing that I've taken forward in the career? Is there anything like that that kind of stood out for you?
So I think a couple of things. So firstly, we talk about transformation, and we're still doing it now. You know, we talk about digital transformation. Surely, you know, it's 2024, everything should be digital by now. So actually the transformation for me, I think we can do the tools and the technology, that's the digital bit, but the business transformation is about the mindset, and it's
Yeah.
about the culture that exists within a business. And, you know, we can implement all of the different methodologies, the different platforms, and you can do all of that. That becomes kind of bread and butter. But actually, it's about, for me, it's about the people, allowing people to have a certain amount of autonomy, encouraging people to take risk. And that's for me, that's the business transformation side of things. It's around the mindset and the culture that a business affords, really. I think the other thing that is absolutely apparent is you have to, if we look at O2, you know, their number one thing was that customer was at the heart of everything they did.
Yeah.
And that ran through from, you know, if you were a manager in corporate, you had to go out and spend time in retail stores talking to customers. They invested a lot of time and effort into strategy sessions and looking at where consumer behavior was changing, and obviously looking for the opportunities that arose from that. So, you know, in my mind, when I'm going through kind of strategy sessions, I think about the technology, I think about the regulatory lens and things that are changing, and then I think about consumer appetite. And, you know, if you look back 2007, when we first started doing NFC and mobile payments, actually consumers weren't ready. It took COVID to really come along, and all the tech had been there for years, contactless payments had been there for years, but the adoption really took off when COVID hit, because it went from contactless to contact free. You know, people didn't want to touch anything. So that's when, and I think that was to me an example of, you know, O2 kept that in their sights about the customer and that investment in what customer trends were coming along.
Yeah. And it's that literally was going to be my next question. So it's kind of nice you kind of almost headed that off, is, you know, the consumer piece, how, you know, being able to look at digital payments, wallets, digital identity, at what point is that adoption there? And I think it'd be interesting to see your take on, if we just compare the UK to the Middle East, you know, in terms of that level of adoption. You know, my father is still, you know, not the biggest adopter on some of these things, and yet you come to the Middle East and, you know, we have, you know, biometrics everywhere, we have cameras, we have, you know, a lot of great systems and processes in place, and you know, it's very telling as a mindset of the consumer, you know, and I think that says a lot about the country as well. So, you know, from the strategy sessions that you've done, both UK, Middle East, Australasia, North America, are there different approaches or different things that you look for in the consumer's behavior to impact the output? Can you walk us through a few of those?
Yeah, 100%. And I'm grinning because, you know, I've had experience in Saudi, where obviously there are government controls. Digital identity is part of the infrastructure. When you arrive in Saudi, everything is biometric, and consumers just do that. They accept it. That's part of their way of life. Yep. You go over to the UK, and, you know, I'm a Brit. I love England. I love everything. You know, it's my family home. However, I think the context, the social context in the UK is almost one of fear around Big Brother and trust and privacy concerns. And with that as a backdrop, it's actually quite difficult to get people on board with some of the ambitions that, you know, if we look at the health service and the NHS and the reforms that are being proposed, the easiest thing is for us as individuals to have a digital health record that we can share with a medic, and that we can, in the case of an emergency, we can allow a loved one to share on our behalf, so that medics can give you the right treatment there and then, no questions about allergies and issues and things like that. That to me makes perfect sense. But I think in the UK public's mind, there is massive concerns. What's the government doing with my data? Why do they want my data? It's going to be breached, and all of this, you know, these big topics that concern people. So yeah, I think you have to look at the cultural differences within territories. If I go back 20 years, maybe a bit more, and we were looking at mobile payments, Canada at the time wasn't seen as an exemplar because they were so collaborative. Now it's just a cultural difference. And in the UK, we were seen as ultra competitive, and the operators didn't actually want to work together, and there was a big tussle about it. So I do think that social context is very, very important.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think probably something we didn't mention there, but, you know, is probably quite obvious to a number of listeners, is this part of the world, the Middle East specifically, it is a much younger population as well. And I think that always is going to help in terms of, you know, they're either telling their parents to adapt, or, you know, or again, the parents are trying to, in a different way, get the world ready for their kids as well, because they're looked after in a different way. So I think it's a very interesting thing that yes, it's governmental, but I think it's entrenched in sort of the whole culture here. It's a really telling thing. Looking at it from a cross-industry perspective, have you seen, you know, if we took there the example of healthcare, have you seen regulation, adoption, more receptive in certain industries versus others? I know healthcare is probably the most personal one for people because I can understand, yes, it's my health data, etc. But taking healthcare aside, are there other industries which are much more receptive, other industries that you wouldn't expect to be resistant but are? That would be interesting to know. Do you forget healthcare? We get that's a tricky one, but the other ones, they're ones that are much better. Are there ones that are much more tricky than you would expect?
I don't know if sectors are particularly pro or resistant, but I
Hmm.
think that you're right. It's about that level of personal data and personal information.
Mm.
What I would say is we have for years, all of us have been sharing our lives on social media. Um, through, you know, fear of missing out. I don't know why we all did it, but we all jumped on the bandwagon, didn't we? We all set up
Yeah.
these profiles and we share all these photos and patterns of our behavior. And I think it's probably between your mobile operator, your big retailers and the loyalty schemes and the social media platforms, actually whoever they is, can find everything they need out about you as an
Yeah.
individual, and also about your behaviors. They can derive behaviors. You talk about cars, chances are you've got a car, or you might be talking about wanting a car. You have car insurance, and they can look at the traffic and your media relationships, things like that. From a regulatory perspective, you asked about different markets and different regulatory environments. The UK has really been open, I think, from a financial and fintech regulatory perspective. So they have sandboxes. So if you are developing a product or service, you can go and operate and run it in the sandbox environment so that you
Mm.
can get to see how things would behave. So I think there's
Yeah.
there's probably two different little threads that have come out with that. So one around that social context stuff, and then the other around the regulatory piece being different in different markets.
Yeah, and I think you're right with companies having our data. In the UK, saw a post recently of an individual who moved back from the Middle East to the UK, and he said, "What the heck? You can't go into a store anymore without having a loyalty card." He was kind of it's kind of a little bit tongue in cheek, but it was very telling because obviously all the data they get from there, stuff in the Middle East, even with the car refueling service that I use,
Yeah.
it sends you preemptive messages. Hey, pretty sure you're low on fuel again. Do you want to make an order? It kind of, part of that's, obviously sort of sense and time, but part of it is probably GPS insight and everything else that goes with
Yeah,
it. So
that's it. And
it is
that kind
interesting.
of sorry, cutting across. I was just going to say that hyper personalization of being able to
Mm.
deliver products and services based on your behaviors, based on your data, based on your, location of your mobile device and your usual patterns.
Yeah. But it is very telling as well for, on one side, when we're talking about certain innovations around payments and identity, that people can be, let's say, a little bit more defensive or precious. But on the other side of the spectrum, if you are being marketed to, and whatever that product may be, we all want it to be hyper personalized. So it's a real, I see it as a real conundrum from consumers as well. B2B, B2C. I want the personalization. I want to know they care. I want to know that they've specifically thought about me, but I also worry, not me personally, but people
Yeah.
will then worry about, but how do they know this? It's a funny conundrum that I do see. The consumer kind of, they want their cake and eat it, as the phrase
Yeah,
goes. I think that's the
absolutely. Yeah,
mm,
and the bottom line. So if we look at a piece of regulation in Europe around Payment Services Directive, so PSD2, When
Mm.
that came out, there are a number of elements to it. One is around strong customer authentication, so making sure that it is Oliver making that transaction. None of us are going to question that. That's a great piece of regulation. There's another element to it, which is direct account access. So what that means is that you could sign up to a major retailer and you
Mm.
could allow them to take the payment direct from your bank account. And so you potentially wouldn't need to use a debit or a credit card. Now, one of the other side elements to that regulation is the person who is accessing your bank account can also look at your transactions that have gone through that account. So that retailer could then look and say, well, we can see a mortgage payment, so we know they're a homeowner. We can see a house insurance payment, so we know, they can derive all of these different things. So we could then try and upsell or cross-sell a different product. From a
Yeah.
consumer's perspective, I don't know anyone who really gets into the regulation and understands exactly what they're signing up for.
100%.
I think if a retailer said to you, I'll take the payment direct from your bank account and I'll give you a 10% discount, people would go, sure. But
Yeah.
what is that 10% actually worth? And I think as an industry, we have a big role to play in educating people about actually translating some of that stuff for them.
No, 100%. And it's the Uber Kareem, the Middle East version. The value's in the data.
Yeah.
The business is profitable and very good and all the other stuff that comes with it, but the value is in the data. What can they use that data for? Who can they take it to? All the other aspects with that. And that's just one example. There's many companies like that. So it's interesting. So looking at kind of regulations and collaborations, what would you say has been either one that you've been a part of or maybe just one that has happened, during your work history? What's been the most sort of significant industry innovation due to that collaboration regulatory change that you could sort of point to? I think it's always good to get a bit of a reminiscent story context. It's always interesting, I think.
Yeah. Okay, so if I put my sort of mobile payments hat on and I think about so the mobile payments that I personally have been involved in has been around creating digital wallets. Now we talk about the Apple Wallet and we talk about Samsung Wallet, but this was even the kind of precursor to those. This would have been a single operator going out and having, bilateral agreements with a number of parties and putting basically your physical card into a digital form on your mobile device. So there was some great examples of collaboration back then, but I think the other side of mobile payments is, of course, in developing markets, and we should look to M-Pesa and what happened in Kenya and being able to create a mobile payment infrastructure through your mobile devices. So, everyone, transient and migrant workers wanting to send money back to their families. And it all started with, an individual going into his friend or a shopkeeper and saying, look, I need to send some money and I want to be able to give that money to my family. And, it came from a need to have quick remittances. And then, of course, roll on, 25 years, 30 years, M-Pesa is one of the most successful mobile payments projects or initiatives. It's gone across multiple regions now. It has huge figures. Like I can probably come back to you with some of the figures, but in terms of the GDP that is carried on that, which just started as, this need to be able to send money. So I think that that's a really good example.
It's a really good one. And I think what's telling is, and I'm sure a number of the listeners will know, but not everyone will, is that actually was something that created more security. Because prior to that, in certain Asian countries, there was agreements between groups of individuals, generally within shopkeepers and so on, that you would pay money to person A, and then at some point it would end up at person B, but on the spot, person B would share money with the end intended recipient based on a password. And all of this was, technically you have money outside of the system being transferred around. It's not safe, it's not secure. It's potentially got money laundering and God knows what else attached to it. And there's a lot of people in there who are doing good things, but there's a lot of people probably doing bad things. This was obviously, something which started off, like you said, with, especially with Africa in mind, helping people out. But ironically, it probably solved other problems, and made the world probably a much safer place from, money laundering and all the things associated with money laundering off the back of it. So, yeah, I think it's nice when a regulation or an innovation probably solves something it didn't realize it would. But I think I think that's the most interesting part. Yeah. And we've kind of mentioned, obviously, yourself being female. We've mentioned, obviously, diversity being not just gender or nationality. Within the organizations you've worked, within the industries that have evolved, what have you seen as some of the initiatives that really worked to help foster that diversity and inclusion? Because we've all heard of companies with a million ideas and not many of them work out, or they try something, it didn't quite work. But let's focus on the positives. What are the ones that you've been a part of? You can either say the company or just say the scheme, etc. What are the ones that worked? Because I think it's great to share, if somebody's listening, they might be in HR, they might be a CEO. If you were to do X, Y, Z type of initiative, this would really help you guys. Because again, we want to try and promote that best in practice sort of initiative. So what are one or two of them that what are one or two that stuck with you that did well? Yeah.
Okay. So I would absolutely say, so you have to, obviously, you're going to think about your sector. And the easy thing for us, so, if I'm in telco and I was working for O2, the natural thing would be to look at what Vodafone might have done, or what Three might have done, or what one of the other operators might have done. What I would say is look outside your sector. So look at other industries that are tackling diversity and inclusion policies. And I'm just actually going to write down inclusion because I want to come back to that point. So I would look outside of your sector and outside of your industry, look at other initiatives. I think it's really, really important that we, as more senior professionals in, whatever world you're working in, that you take time and you commit to helping bring through a pipeline of talent. And that pipeline of talent needs to be diverse. And this isn't about a quota. It's not about saying, right, 30% of our board must be female, 30% must be of minority colour. I don't believe in quotas. I think quotas are good because I suppose they focus the mind, but it still has to be on merit. Of course it does. It has to be, your board has to be representative from a skills and talent perspective as well. But I think the inclusion point that I wanted to come back to, which is often the bit that gets missed when you are doing quotas, it's all very well and good. If you've got a board of 10 people and you've got, 3 women, 2 with different lifestyle choices, a couple of different colour things, on paper, that looks great. But you have to set the culture that says all of those people have a voice and all of those people have the right to be listened to, and that inclusivity. And I think that's the trick to all of this, is the inclusivity bit rather than actually the diversity bit.
Yeah, and I'll add one bit on top of that from what we see with clients that get it right and clients that still struggle with it, is you can be diverse on paper, but if you all went to the same school or you all are from the same country or something, then you're not really diverse because you're still singing from the same hymn sheet. I'm listening to a really fun book at the minute, Becoming a Trader, or The Trader. He was basically a trader who became the #1 trader for Citibank, and then he's got out and things. And he came from a poor background, didn't dress the part, But he's kind of, I'm early into the book, so I don't, I'm not giving anything away, but he's not the stereotypical, and he goes to LSE, and he said early on it was really easy to basically excel against your peers because they all came from, whether they were Russian, whether they were British, whether they were from China or wherever, they all had rich parents, they were all looked after, and they all fought in exactly the same way. It's because they all end up at LSE. And so he was like, I was the only guy that didn't think in the same way. So when it came to these sort of quiz things that would help him get his internship, he always won them because he would do exactly the opposite to everybody else. And then he ended up being the most successful trader in the world for Citigroup at the time. So, I think there is a lot to be said about this. It needs to be approaching it from, like I said, looking at the consumer behavior, looking at the individual's behavior from a different lens. So not just going to the same university.
100%. And if and we've all been there, we've all been to different events where they have panels and they talk about diversity and inclusion, and there's typically a token female, and you see this map out, and they have the same conversations, and they will still be having the same conversations in 10 years time if they don't start to break the mold of where people come from, their backstory. Social mobility is massively important. And I think the other thing I would say on that, though, is as a senior leader, if you are recruiting a pipeline of people from diverse backgrounds, different walks of life, just take a second to think about their background before you start planning, networking drinks at 7 o'clock at night in a bar that's going to cost them a fortune to get to. You have to be aware that sometimes our young people can't afford to take part in some of those, oh, you've got to be seen networking at this event, and well, they might not actually have the means to do that. So I think we need to be a bit more empathetic, and that needs to come through in our leadership qualities as well. If they could teach empathy, Oliver, wouldn't that be great? Of course,
be the dream. Yeah, but it's without naming organizations, it's part of the reason I enjoy being in a more boutique organization where we actually look at our internal culture and then partner with clients that have the same mentality. I myself grew tired of going, you must go to this work event on these days for this and everything else that comes with it. And you'd be like, well, I'm married, I've got kids. I now have 2 kids. At the time you got a kid, you don't want to do it anymore. Got zero interest in it. We are boring. I get up and go to the gym, and then I went to the gym at 6 in the morning. I was up at 5:15 to go to the gym at 6. I don't want to be out till late.
It's self-care, isn't it? And it has to have space in your life.
I now go for yearly health checkups. I mean, my God, who would do that when you're younger? Yeah, and then when you get over 40, they make you go on a treadmill, which makes it even more depressing. So
wait till you're over 50.
Yeah. Well, let's not go there yet. Talking though of innovation, talking of the industries changing, where from fintech, digital payments, what do you see as kind of where do you see it in the next 5 to 10 years, and how would that translate into the potential skills that leaders should be developing now for themselves and their staff?
Okay. So from a tech perspective, if I think about mobile payments, obviously we've mentioned digital wallets. Your digital wallet that you have currently is no more than a representation of your physical wallet. It's basically your phone pretending to be a card. So when the card reader, when you go into a store and you tap your phone, the card reader just sees that that's a card. It doesn't actually know that it's a phone. So I think there's going to be some advances in terms of technology and how digital wallets will behave. I talk a lot about our wallets becoming smarter than us. I think that our wallets will present us with the loyalty card that we need in the right store. It will alert us to a point balance that we might have that is running out of date and that needs to be redeemed. So I think there's some stuff there around loyalty and merchant engagement. I think that's going to change in the wallet. Ultimately, your wallet is going to have your identity credentials. And wouldn't it be great if I could serve my credential to say I'm over 18 or I'm over 21? Of course, I'm a bad example because clearly I am. But, you know, if I could share those credentials without actually saying who I am. So currently, you know, my daughter, if she goes to a bar, she takes her passport with her. One, there's a risk of her losing it. But two, she's having to tell them who she is, you know, where she was born, what her passport number is. They don't need to know that. They just need to know that she is over 18.
Date of birth. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So I think the wallets will end up having more about your identity credentials in there. And I really, really hope that that will be the gateway. Our wallets will be the gateway to our kind of digital and physical interactions with government services, health services, and our financial stuff. So I think that. Then from a leadership skills perspective, you know, I touched on it a few moments ago, empathy. We have to evolve our thinking. I think people challenge whether you can be commercially successful and actually be a decent person. The two aren't exclusive. They should be together. I think consumers are certainly becoming more conscious of who they deal with from a business perspective. And I think a lot of businesses are going to start to be like that. You gave your own example of, you know, you want to work with partners who are like-minded. Well, that should cut across all of the different sectors. And I think, you know, as leaders, we've got to be ready for that. And we've got to perhaps not be as, you know, as we were in the late 80s and early 90s, as brutal and, you know, you must do that, all that kind of dictatorial leadership style that we've all been on the receiving end of. You know, we need to be more rounded.
The Gordon Gekko quotes spring to mind. All of that stuff. It was a good film, but there's a time and place. Going back to the bit you mentioned about merchants and the wallets, the evolution of the wallet, and it, for example, recommending loyalty cards and things.
Yeah.
Totally off the cuff thought, and I'd be interested to get your thoughts. How would that potentially work in you've got you're needing all your merchants to come under the same sort of framework agreement, because at the moment, you know, there's a few apps that I've got with different merchants, and my gosh, they operate extremely differently. Some are very good, some are awful, some require a million things, some don't. So does it need to start with a sort of standardization on the merchant side to then enable it to sort of slot in? And then also then how do you then start to prioritize, i.e. if you have people going down the high street, how do you stop it ending up, you know, your phone pinging every 5 minutes going to this store, going to that store, going to that store, they've got this offer, that offer, that offer, which I did a consulting piece, and I won't say the company, but I did a consulting piece for a restaurant food business, and that is what they tried to push. And it did not work because they wanted to be able to control, as you walk down the street, you would be constantly pushed notifications, and it failed miserably. What do you think will be the balance? Is it get the merchant bit sorted on a framework, and then how would you approach the next bit? Again, I'm totally putting you on the spot, but it's no,
that's
interesting
fine.
one.
It is really interesting, and there are technologies out there to help. So first off, in terms of, you know, this fragmentation of apps that we already see, I think there will be a role for orchestration. So you may end up with an orchestration layer that sits somewhere embedded in the operating system of your device. that
Mm.
will be able to pull together all of those different apps. So you will then, you as a consumer, and we know this from years and years of research, people want one app on their phone. They don't want to have
Yeah.
to, if I look at my phone now, it's ridiculous. I have to scroll page after page to find the app, or, search for the
Yeah.
app. So I think there's going to be an orchestration layer, or an intermediary that could come along and take all of those apps and feed the right signals into the wallet. So that's from a app management perspective. I think there's that.
Mm.
I think from a high street experience, walking down the high street, obviously we've got geolocation that works now. Another technology that will be coming more prevalent over the next, I reckon, 5 years is ultra wideband. And ultra wideband, another mobile tech, and it will work in such a way, Oliver, that blows my mind a bit. But if I had, let's take Dubai as an example, if
Mm.
I had my NOL card on a wallet in my device, and I would enter a transit station, the gate actually knows that I'm there and knows that I've got credit on my phone, and through ultra wideband will just open the gates. So could you imagine, 5 years from now, you're not going to have that congestion at the point of a transit gate. The
Yeah.
gate's going to open because it knows that you've got your credential. It knows you've got a right to travel, which is your payment. That's sorted.
Mm.
So it just opens the gate. If you were a city planner, that is going to be transformative
Yeah.
for crowd control. And I give the example of it in a transit environment, but just think of it in an event environment. You're obviously off to a fantastic concert this weekend, and much to your chagrin, but
Uh,
you're going to go off to this concert, and imagine the customer experience if
mm.
it is completely seamless and easy to get through. So I think there's some technologies that are coming along which are going to improve things. Then there's an opportunity for new platform providers to come in on that orchestration or intermediary stuff. And then,
Yeah.
of course, you've still got the standardization stuff, which is, organizations like the GSMA or Mobile Ecosystem Forum or the Retail Council, they will work with their members to try and get standards delivered and implemented so that actually it's easier for everyone.
Yeah. And I think, at least from Dubai's perspective, we have a sort of a glimpse into the future that when you go through Terminal 3,
Yeah.
that experience is now next level. You don't have to present barely any documentation. It kind of,
Yeah.
scans, does the thing, opens. It sucks when you travel with your kids now because they don't have, it doesn't work on kids. So you have to go and queue again. Yeah, I mean, I shouldn't say that, but traveling with them is it's a bit more depressing when you have to go through the queues. And if you travel for business, you don't have to. So there's some merit for business travel, I must say. But so looking back on the career to date, still a long way, still lots to be achieved and to be done. But with the experiences you've got across multi-country, and multi-organization, what's the one or two best leadership lesson, life lesson, combination of the two that stuck with you? What's something which, whether that's early or more recent, what, these are things that have just been invaluable to me to help grow as maybe a business person, maybe as a person individually, what maybe have been a couple of those?
I've worked for some incredible leaders. One of the first people that was just transformed my opportunity was at Cisco, and I had joined Cisco as basically a sales administrator, and within a very short period of time had moved from that into an innovation role, into professional services, and then into business operations for the professional services business. And that was because this one person said to me, "Why are you doing this?" And I was like, "Well, I didn't really I didn't come out of school. I didn't know what I wanted. And I was in my early 20s at that point." And
Mm.
he was the one who said, "No, no, 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 come on. we can do more here. I think you'd be really good at X, Y, and Z. And he then sponsored me, he involved me, he took me to meetings where I'd walk into these meetings and it would be, you know, a boardroom full of gentlemen, some older, but men. And as a young girl, because I was a young girl at that point, and I just used to sit there thinking, please don't ask me a question, please don't ask me a question, because I've got no idea what I'm going to say to you if you talk to me. But I listened, and I listened and listened and listened. So I think that was number one. I had an opportunity. I took that opportunity and I went and listened, and I learned from listening to other people. And then, of course, as you grow a bit older, you get more confidence to ask questions. So that was, you know, if I look back, that was a transformative moment for me. After I had my first daughter, that was a transformative moment. I was at O2, I was delivering technology projects, I was working on data products and services. This is back in, you know, 3G and the UK's first MVNO with Tesco Mobile. And when I had my daughter, I went back and I said that I wanted to do something different. And if I was going to give up time being at home with her, it had to be something interesting. And I got moved over to business strategy on a secondment, and that was another massive step change for me, and that opened all sorts of doors. So take those opportunities if doors are open for you. Seek internal sponsors, but also that bit around, I mentioned it earlier in the cross-industry stuff, look at sponsors or mentors externally as well, outside of your business, because I think that's really valuable, because again, it's that different perspective and different lens. So yeah, so those would be, you know, go and listen. If a door's open for you, walk through it, and certainly look outside your sector for other guidance and sponsors.
Yeah, and the mentorship thing's very telling, because it's something that we do as a small side thing. So it's a sort of a value add service that's given to certain clients, but it's specifically to connect peer to peers that are not in the same industry, and it's specifically to give you that insight from another lens. And I think that goes back to the diversity of thought, goes through definitely the whole theme of this session has been that whole, how do you look at something a bit different and what do you take from those? So no, 100%. In terms of some of the different stakeholders you worked for, what's been maybe some of the, again, your one or two best lessons, or your one or two learnings of how to kind of manage those stakeholder relationships? Because it's something which we're always looking at, and I think it's something which is key to whatever type of business you do. But I think some people are very good at it, and some people are room for improvement. Is there any kind of, looking back on career today, you know, ABC stood me in really good stead, or feedback I've received was XYZ, or initially I was really rubbish and then I did this and it got better? Is there anything like that, a bit anecdotal, you could share?
Oh gosh. So public speaking for me, you know, as a young person, you know, at Cisco, I would rather have crashed my car than have to have turned up and presented to an audience. And then when I had my daughter, my first daughter, I was like, God, I've just brought a human being into the world. Why am I so afraid of standing up in front of people? Because you think about it, Oliver, you go into these rooms, you go to conferences, you see people speaking, and they look at ease with it, and they feel they come across as, you know, they are just comfortable with that. And I'm sure some of them are, but I also know that a lot of them aren't comfortable. But everyone in that room is there to learn something. So I think if you can change your mindset about, you know, public speaking. For me, I had some hypnotherapy, and I went and understood a bit more about some coping mechanisms. And still to this day, before I stand up in Mobile World Congress or Money 2020 or any of the big events that I've spoken at, I don't have caffeine beforehand. I make sure that I am really, really well prepped. And again, I've been asked to speak because I know my subject. So I have to take some confidence in that. So that's an example of one thing that I was just, oh God, please don't make me speak. But then I've kind of overcome that. And then what was the second part of your question? I think you asked a second bit to that.
Oh gosh, put me back on the spot. Well, let me look back at my notes now. Oh my gosh, I've forgot my own question now. Oh, in terms of balancing the stakeholder expectation into the
Yes.
lessons that
Yeah.
you've kind of learned from that. Yes.
Yeah. So obviously, I've been fortunate enough to work in an environment, in all of my environments, where I've had to deal with external parties, be it clients, or be it customers, or be it partners, in order to deliver a particular thing. So loads of really complex stakeholder management, communication, keeping close to them, and also trying to understand from their perspective, that it's that what's in it for me, and really sort of putting, I suppose, yourself in their shoes. If you were business A, why would you be interested, and why do you want success with partner C? It's that putting that different lens on it. So I think that all comes down to really, really solid communication skills.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely very solid advice. And there may be a little bit of overlap in this question, but I still think it's poignant to ask it because it is from a different angle. What's kind of reflecting back, what's been kind of your, if you could change one thing in your career, what may that be? Or if you want to do it in a different way, what's one thing you wish you had done you didn't? So either something you'd change or something you wish you'd done you'd not. Take it whichever way you want, or do both. Yeah.
Okay. Probably a bit linked. I wish I'd learnt to handle confrontation sooner. So if I look back over all the companies that I've worked for, there have been a number of incidents where actually I found it easier to walk away, not from the role, but to walk away from the team, or walk away from a job that I perhaps really liked and was very good at, because of one individual. And that's happened to me, that's happened twice in my career. And it was years ago. And I look back and think, why did I allow that to happen? I should have just really stood my ground. I should have had more faith in what I believed in, or more confidence in my ability. And I think that when I say about, dealing with confrontation, it's not about me being more confrontational, but it was about the way that I handled how confrontational someone else had been, and I would have been perhaps, too young, too emotional, just easier for me to go. So I think, looking back, that side of things, I would definitely say in your toolkit, learn your coping skills for challenging situations.
Yeah, I think the learning your coping skills, the what makes you the individual, what makes you stand out, I think that's something which everybody should do more of. It doesn't matter where you are in your career, there's always, I think that goes down to your messaging. Why, again, back to why should somebody partner with you? Why do you do what you do? Getting that message across. And then also from a confrontation standpoint, I'll caveat your point and kind of say, I think there is a little bit of a balance there. I think there is sometimes, bless you. There's always I think there's always a balance to this. And I think I'll just say it's more from the listener standpoint, in case somebody is in that situation. Yes, do have the conversation so you have covered off the bases. But there are just some people that you can't work with. And I think, sometimes there is that thing to be said of, you can't flog a dead horse, as the phrase goes. There are some people that just are not meant to work together, and that might be, a boss that wasn't who you joined, and then you got a new boss, an internal move, something like that. I had it once in my career. Joined a firm, joined for a particular boss. That boss changed. Just did not get on with the new boss at all. We had conversations. We never saw eye to eye. And then we separated. And I think there's something to be said about, it's the getting the balance and knowing when to pull the cord. I think that's your point is definitely very valid. You must sort of be comfortable that you've dealt with the confrontation, and you do need to do some of that. But I think there is something to be said about pull the cord before your mental health's affected as well. And it's a very hard one to get the balance right on.
I think certainly I see less bullying in the workplace now than 20 years ago. I think 20 years ago, people were still, just do it. I've told you to do it, just do it, with a few expletives thrown in. I've seen less of that. That has definitely diminished over time, because I do think we're evolving, aren't we? And we should be evolving, and we should be more accepting of some of those softer skills. Years ago, I was asked in an interview, why you? Why not Tom, Dick and Harry, who've just walked through the door? And I was the only female candidate. And I said, well, because I'm female. And the interviewer, laughed his head off. And I said, you think this is funny? I said, but we bring different things. I said, I think differently to Tom, Dick and Harry. Now, Tom, Dick and Harry will think differently to each other as well. But, it is that evolution around our skills and acceptance of different people, different walks of life, different contexts.
100%. And I think there's trying to get the balance right, that we don't go too far the other way, which certain countries I do at times hear the odd sort of strange thing where you think, gosh, it's a little bit too far one way than the other. But I would agree. I think we're in a much better place than we were, at the start of our careers. I think, people do have those abilities to go and speak out when needed. I think, slightly aside from this, but again, going back to a book I literally just read as well on the Wirecard fraud, the biggest reason the Wirecard fraud got to where it did is the regulators didn't listen to the whistleblowers. So I think there is this, do speak out, but I think there does need to be. I don't think that would happen today, because I think culturally people have at least learned from that you do need to have the right mechanisms and listen to people that have proper grievances about the way a business is not behaving. If people don't know the story, it was a big fraud case. Go look it up, Wirecard. But this wasn't just simply the way they were treating their staff. This was a whole different kettle of fish of things that were not very good at that organization, and ultimately it became insolvent. So worth looking up. But I think there's some really, really key points there for sure. So kind of, as we always do in a kind of a bit of a wrap-up session, I would love to keep talking, but I'm equally conscious of everyone's time, and sort of thinking, if we were to sort of give a sort of a closing message to the audience in terms of for yourself, so your message that you would give to a younger you, or a message that you would give to an aspiring leader, or a message that you would say to a peer in the industry, if you guys are doing X, think about Y, or maybe a bit of all three, what would be your kind of closing 1, 2, 3 statements to the audience? And it can, mix and match between that as you wish, but be a bit of a closing, and then we'll kind of, then we'll say thanks for your time kind of scenario. But your sort of closing remarks.
All right. So for younger self or younger people coming through, I mentioned it before, if doors are open for you, walk through them. They've been opened for you because someone recognizes something in you that they want other people to see. For peers in my industry, it would be probably open some of those doors for other people and encourage you know, we have to have a different talent pool coming through. And, you know, 22-year-old Claire, who used to blush the second she walks in a room, you know, she only got to where she got because someone opened a door. So maybe open some doors, people of my level.
Mm.
And then from an industry perspective, I think, you know, technology is going to continue to disrupt and evolve. We've got the whole AI thing, which we're just scratching the surface of. So I think people need to be keep abreast of technology. They need to go out and research what's happening. They must keep informed about the changing regulatory landscape, and then, you know, keep your customer at heart.
Yeah, and you know, tying all of that together as a bit of a summary, I think it is communication, listening, empathy. And I think if we can, if everyone can take your closing messages and those 3 statements away from today, I think they'll all be we'll make a better race. We'll make a better world, as it were. But yes, exactly. But yeah, look, thank you so much for today, Claire. I've really enjoyed it. I think we've covered off some really great points. I think there's been some really nice insight, and I think hopefully, you know, the listeners will again have some nice takeaways there to help, you know, go away, think on, take into their own careers, their own workplaces, and ultimately we can help, you know, together evolve and continue to develop. So again, everyone, thank you for your time. Please do like, subscribe, and share this. And Claire, once again, thanks so much for your time, and we'll catch up again soon, and thank you. Cheers.
That's great. Thank you.